Good evening, and welcome to a virtual town hall hosted by your 42nd District Representatives. Today, you will be seeing and hearing from Representatives Sharon Shoemake and Alicia Rule. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I will read those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit your questions live via the chat box, so please submit your questions now. Before we begin answering questions, I'd like to open the floor up to our lawmakers for some brief opening remarks. First, we'll hear from Representative Sharon Shoemake. Representative Shoemake is a professor of environmental economics, urban economics, and energy policy at Western Washington University. She serves as vice chair of the Rural Development and Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee and is a member of the Capital Budget and Environment and Energy Committees. Representative Shoemake?
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis. And I'm so glad to have people on this YouTube channel. I miss seeing everyone in person. And, this year has been really hard, and it's not been what anyone expected a year and a few months ago. We have this pandemic caused recession that's impacted people in just really different ways across the country, across the state, but even on your own block. Some of my neighbors are having really different pandemic experiences than my family is. Some people are fine, others are really hurting, and there's parts of our economies where we kind of need to put sandbags up, to shore up the industries till we're on that other side of this pandemic. Things like restaurants, small businesses, live music. But we also are realizing with this pandemic, it's making us examine a lot of the structures around us and realizing that we need some structural change for the people in our communities where the economy wasn't working for them even before COVID happened. I want you to know that Alicia and I have been working for you every day in Olympia. We talk a lot and we say, well, what would people at home think about this? How do we wisely invest the federal funds to small businesses that are struggling, public health, vaccines, schools dealing with extra costs and unmet needs? How do we get direct relief out to families, these ones that we know are struggling, to renters and landlords, as well as things like food? And so I'm really proud of the work we're doing. The budgets are coming out right now, so that's what everyone's talking about, but that's not the only thing we've been doing. But in those budgets, you'll see long-term investments and things that reduce poverty, things like the Working Families Tax Rebate, early learning, one of the best investments we can make, affordable housing, mental health, healthcare generally, and a response to climate change and a plan for salmon restoration. It's exciting and stressful, but I've got to see one of my favorite parts of it is being able to work with Alicia Rule. I think you'll see that we complement each other really well. We're very different, but if there was ever a time to want an economist and a mental health care professional to work together, I really feel like we're well prepared in this economy and this pandemic and this time to be your state legislator. So I guess I'll turn it over to Alicia.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. If you want to go ahead, I was going to introduce you, but you can go right into it, Representative Rule.
Thank you, Sheridan, Travis. Yes, I am Alicia Rule, and I'm so honored to be here. I agree with the remarks of Representative Shoemake. This is a really tough time. And we know that COVID has shaken us in pretty well every area. And although this position honestly is really heavy some days, and I lose sleep because I am really aware of how much it's impacting you all, I'm really honored to be here, to be the best representative for you and the voice for you that I can be. And we're doing some really exciting things, so I can't wait to tell you about it. But I'm really excited to hear from you as well. We get so busy, we work many, many hours on your behalf with each other. But I can't wait to hear from you so that you can tell me what life is like for you right now in this, and we can continue the work that we've started here. Just trying to look for a path to recovery for everybody without leaving anyone behind. So I am also very happy to be working with Representative Shoemake. We make a wonderful team because we have areas of strength that complement each other really well. And I just can't wait to hear from you today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we will begin taking our questions now. We actually have quite a few questions people submitted ahead of time. We got a lot in that email inbox. We are going to take questions live. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat there. And so I'm going to go to one of our first questions that was submitted via email. And this one is actually from Nick. Nick says that transportation is now the largest single source of carbon emissions in Washington. What policies can the legislature enact to fight climate change by reducing our dependence on gasoline-powered vehicles? Representative Shoemake, do you want to maybe start with that question?
Yeah. So when we talk about the climate change impacts of driving vehicles, it's fundamentally about the amount of fuel that we burn, right? And so I don't know if you can see this or if it's going to mess up. You can't really see it. I always think of this as a three-legged stool. And so when we talk about emissions from vehicles, we have one, which is the carbon intensity of the fuel. So how much CO2 are you releasing for every gallon of whatever you're burning? Another leg of that is what is the fuel efficiency of the vehicle, right? So to get from home to work, it's going to take you, you're going to burn a lot more, you're going to create a lot more pollution in a big truck than you are in a tiny Prius. Although maybe what you need is the big truck. And then finally, the last leg of the stool is vehicle miles traveled. So that's how much are you actually driving? And we really have to think about all three of these to efficiently decarbonize. So we have one bill in the legislature that's not my favorite, that's directly regulating the carbon intensity of your fuel. So the low carbon fuel standard says that by 2018, we have to have 10% less carbon intensity of our fuel. And there's a number of ways that you can get at that. I say that's not my favorite bill because of my economics background and because I don't think it's particularly cost effective. And there's a lot of opportunities for unintended consequences. We also have to think about, well, what are we gonna, if you look at where electric vehicles are, they're actually cheaper per mile than a gasoline powered vehicle is. And so how can we help people switch to electric? I think, I don't have an electric vehicle, I can't wait to get one, but reports are that they're actually a lot better than gas powered vehicles because you don't have to go to the gas station, right? You can charge at home. It's cheaper per mile, there's less maintenance on them. And so, but it's getting used to that new technology, right? We've built something where we're on gasoline powered vehicles and we're just kind of used to it. And then we also have to look at that third stool, which is vehicle miles traveled. And so we can switch all over from gas powered to electric vehicles, but we also should be thinking about the way that we build our communities. So people out in the county are probably going to be driving back and forth in a carbon-free vehicles, and that's fine. But we're also know that we're going to add a lot of people to the cities and to Whatcom County. And if we do that and we all stick with one car per person, we're going to have a lot of congestion. We're not going to have enough parking for everyone. And so we need to think about building communities that are walkable, that are transit accessible, that are bike rideable. And that's something that I'm also really excited about. And we're seeing that in the transportation budget and the investments. We're seeing that in some of our housing policy that encourages density, that encourages what we call infill. And I even have a little bill on electric bicycles, trying to create a tax incentive for an electric bicycle, just like we have them for electric vehicles. And when we think about this, we realize that transportation is a yes and problem, right? There's not one solution to how we're going to decarbonize vehicles, but what we need to see is we need to decarbonize transportation. We need to see a yes and part of that might be what we're doing right now, working from home, right? These Zoom calls instead of business travel as much as we have been. But it's all about aligning those incentives and thinking about, we have this transportation system that was based on it not being a big deal to release CO2 into the atmosphere. Now that it is, how do we transition away from that? How do we transition away from it equitably? And how do we do it cost effectively? And that's what's really important to me.
Great, thank you. We have another question here, and this is actually a question from Joanne. Joanne had asked, when will our city and county help the homeless and stop sweeping them from place to place? It's cruel, expensive, and wasteful. Representative Ruhl, would you perhaps want to take this question? I think perhaps in general terms of what the state can do for homelessness and housing needs.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you for asking the question. This is one of the most imperative things we should and are working on in the legislature right now. Homelessness is not a one-size-fits-all problem, and it's not going to require a one-size-fits-all approach to solving it. Folks who are experiencing homelessness have a complex set of needs. They're as diverse as any of the rest of us and require services that fit their particular need. I'm excited about quite a few things that we're doing right now. We have invested a lot into multiple tiers of housing. That is one of the pieces to this puzzle, but we also have something really neat going on in Whatcom County that I'm really proud of, the Crisis Stabilization Center. At the Crisis Stabilization Center, there are two sides. There's a substance use disorder side and the mental health side. the two teams can work together. And so that means, folks who have dual diagnosis are able to get treatment there and then help stabilize long enough to then connect in with a path to more stable housing and more stable life, depending on what the multiple needs are. I'm particularly excited about this program because it's going to be something pretty amazing that's happening right here in Whatcom County, but also that it gives us an opportunity to show folks around the state and across the state what we've done, because I think that is one of the pieces to this puzzle that's going to be extremely helpful. It's not everything, but it's definitely something innovative and a good solution to some of the problems that we're seeing. The other thing I'm thinking a lot about is, there's just multiple layers of this homeless issue, but one of the things I've been working on is working on early intervention. And so one of the bills that I've been working on is the House bill that has to do with homeless children and babies. As it stands right now, families who have children ages 5 and under who are in campers or going from couch to couch, you kind of imagine kids having to set up their bed with blankets on a friend's floor. That's not actually considered homeless right now. And so we're not able to access some of those homeless services that would be available if the children are 5 and older. So that is something that I want to change, that definition of homelessness. And so far it's looking good. We're not quite finished yet, but hopefully we'll see that come through final passage. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the bill you just mentioned also touches on a question from Tina, who is asking about what you could do about folks like that. So you got 2 questions with one there.
Nice.
We have a question here from Lad. Lad asks, teachers and the elderly have now been vaccinated. The CDC has revised the social distancing for in-person school kids from 6 feet to 3 feet. And there have been 0 COVID-related deaths of people under 19 and under in Washington State. So considering the very, very low risk to our children and the increased mental health issues impacting our kids, why are kids not in school full time? Isn't their education and mental health essential? And I know you both are parents, so maybe you both have thoughts on this, but Representative Ruhl, why don't you start off with that one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This one really does hit close to home because day after day, I still have children bebopping in and out of my makeshift home office that used to be a playroom. I think many of us know how hard this has been, all jokes aside. Many of us know how hard this has been on our kids. It's easier, and the data shows that for mental health, it's easier for adults to bounce back. And the expectation is that we'll do that fairly quickly. It's harder for our kids. And as a youth mental health professional and somebody who's worked with kids and youth my whole life, I took it upon myself to work with the governor's office directly. I wrote a letter calling out for some intervention quickly because I saw this happening not only in my practice and our constituents, but really I just saw how much my kids were struggling too. And this is just, even with all of the tools that we have to try to help them, this isn't working very well. So I'm very thankful that we have good, new, better information to work with now. When COVID first hit, we didn't know. Now, not to say that it'll continue to stay the same. We don't really know what's coming next with the variants, and I'm not a COVID expert. But I do listen to the experts and take their opinions very seriously. And I think that we need to continue moving forward with a plan that's going to prioritize getting kids back to some sort of normal as quickly as possible. The other thing that I asked and have been happy to work with the governor's office on is making a safe plan for kids to return to sports. I am very thankful that one of the things that got funded in the House budget that's still being negotiated, but has been listed as my request for trauma-informed behavioral health providers in our local schools. That is incredibly important as they re-enter back through the doors of those school buildings, that not only are we dealing with learning loss, but that we recognize that many kids are dealing with significant trauma after this, and that we need to make sure that schools are prepared to properly help support and find the right resources for those kiddos. The other thing I have been working really hard on is ensuring that we do some innovative education, including outdoor education, so that when we're trying to navigate, the distance complication of what we're looking at in schools and learning loss, and the fact that some kids have been out of school for an entire year or close to it. I think outdoor education is one of the answers that we can look to for an innovative way of dealing with this. So always forefront of my mind, working with kids. We'll always be a voice for kids, and we'll continue working very closely to try to look for the best path to get kids fully back in school.
And I just want to thank Alicia for her work on this. None of these are easy decisions. As much ability as we can, I think parents should be able to make decisions. School boards should have leniency as well. The priority should be on getting kids back to school, but I mean, my husband and I talked for a long time about what to even do with our own kids. And that was a difficult decision to be making, as I'm sure it is for everyone out there in Washington State as well.
Thank you. So I'll just send out a reminder. We've had a few questions come in, but if you're watching live, you can actually submit your own question in the chat, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. We do have a couple of other questions. We have someone who's asking about a vote on a bill, House Bill 1236. This is the good cause eviction bill, and I know you both have talked about this before, but Jim asks if you could explain your votes because you voted differently on this bill. Representative Shewmake, do you want to start first about why you voted one way, and Representative Rule, you can talk about why you voted the other.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis. So just cause eviction means that you have to have a legitimate business reason to evict someone. We had someone in our neighborhood who was evicted because she had a Black Lives Matter sign out, and the landlord just didn't agree with it, right? And the irony was that this was before the summer of 2020. Now you can't walk a block in my neighborhood without seeing a Black Lives Matter sign, right? And so I don't think that's the right, I don't care if it's Black Lives Matter or Trump or anything, like you shouldn't be able to evict someone because you disagree with their political positions. I don't think that's a just reason to evict someone. I've heard other stories about people being evicted for maybe reasons that aren't a business reason. That being said, the bill wasn't perfect. I think Alicia's objections, you'll hear about them, we talked about this a lot, are reasonable. And I live across the street from an apartment building, and we've had people that I didn't like living across the street from them, but it was even harder for the other people in the apartment building. But we know eviction can be destabilizing, it can be humiliating, and it is one of those things that happens, I mean, especially when it happens to a kid and a family. I mean, that's a hard thing to come back by. And so we want to make sure that if someone's being evicted, it's for a legitimate reason and not just because you don't like them or you hold a prejudice or.
Yeah, and mostly we agree on all of those things. So just to be clear, I have great concern with the amount of housing challenges our community is experiencing. It is absurd right now to try to find a rental, and there's not a lot of things that are more stressful than having housing instability. So I will continue to do the work that we have been doing on multiple ways of meeting some of these challenges. This particular bill just had a couple of details that I was uncomfortable with. I hope they'll work on over on the Senate side, and then we can bring it back this direction. But one of the things I was especially worried about is just that there was no sort of addressing the safety issue, so that if there was a tenant that happened to be unsafe in some way, maybe a sexual predator or perhaps harassing another tenant or the property owner, there wasn't a provision for them to be excused from that lease. So I just felt like there was a few details that need a little bit more working out, but certainly want to make sure that we've got a lot of other things in place to continue to work on this horrific housing situation.
And can I jump in with one more thing? So my mom was a landlord, and so I've seen how difficult it is to evict someone when they're not paying their rent or they're causing problems to the tenant. And I have a lot of sympathy for this, but requiring just cause won't change that. If they're not paying their rent, if they're causing damage to the property, those are all legitimate business reasons. So I think most landlords, this won't impact them. It's just those situations where someone is using their position in, I feel like it's inappropriate to be kicking someone out of their home because you don't like their political signs or you have some other issue that's not a legitimate business purpose.
And I agree with that too. One of the things that bothered me about this bill is that I was remembering some of that we have really a lot of small landlords here in Whatcom County. Most of the landlords are small landlords. So it's just somebody who has maybe an extra house or so that is a rental. And I think that we need to make sure and be mindful of the fact that some of the problems that I heard described in great detail that were happening, particularly in the also horrific Seattle market, they just haven't been things that we've seen here. So the solutions did make sense for that area, but at this point, at least, that hasn't been some of the particular challenges that we have here. So I'm kind of on the lookout for that as well.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Catherine. Catherine says, the loss of women in the workforce has been enormous. Is there anything the state can do to prioritize the American Rescue Plan money to assist women getting back into the workforce? And I know that this was of a particular question that was raised when the House budget writers were writing the budget, allocating that money for various needs in the state. So Representative Ruled, why don't you start with that one? And Representative Shoemake, I think perhaps your economics background might come into play here.
Yes, thank you. I would be happy to jump in on this one. I actually just read the other day that women in the workplace are as low as it was in 1988. So if we don't think that this has impacted women in a negative way, we have really missed the boat. The thing that I'm most excited about that we're working on this year is the Fair Start for Kids. And that is a childcare package that has a lot of detail, that's very thoughtful, that's been supported by the Association of Washington Business. And the reason is because we need to get women working again. And you just can't do that when you've got kids out of school. Even in hybrid school, it's challenging. So we really do, we had a crisis in childcare long before COVID ever hit. But then even though we were short prior to COVID, more childcare facilities closed down, and it just got harder and harder to make it work for the providers. So we did a lot of things in that bill. We looked at alleviating taxes and fees for childcare providers. We looked at just making a system that works better for both providers, as well as having a variety of options for families. So not a one-size-fits-all approach, but one that includes good solutions for family providers, as well as larger childcare facilities. I believe that's one of the biggest ways that we can impact getting women back into their professions and into the workplace the way that they want to be.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. And I jump on a lot of that. One of the things that we also see with women is that they're more likely to be in service jobs. And those were some of the jobs that were quickly hit the worst, right? The other thing is that they're also more likely to be caregivers. So that means that maybe you're taking care of your parents or your children, and those duties are falling on you if you're when you're a woman. And so I think that we look at what's happened and the losses that have been made in terms of women in the workforce, and these are losses to us all. When you cannot best use the talents and brilliance of half your population, you just can't have a modern economy that's functioning at the level that it would otherwise be, right? This is just bad economics to exclude half of our population. And so I really think what we need here is structural change. When we talk about structural change, this is a big part of it. Childcare is a huge part of it. Guess what? Children can use school before they're 5, right? Like children's days end at 3, but the work day doesn't. And so we also need to have affordable childcare for school-age children as well. Part of this is also going to be making up some lost time that women have spent doing this caregiving work or out of work because they're in a service job. And so a few years ago, we actually set ourselves up pretty well here with the workforce investments that we made in the 2019 session. And so we'll continue to see that with community and technical colleges, especially. Those are places where you can really lift people out of intergenerational poverty. And I hope a lot of women are going to see this time and realize maybe this is the time to go get my AA or go get an additional degree and find a higher wage at the other edge of it. We're also seeing things like the Working Families Tax Rebate that really helps families that are in need. And at the federal level, I am so thankful that they passed the child tax credits. That's going to be transformative. Childhood poverty is $1 trillion. Our economy would be trillions of dollars richer if we could eliminate child poverty. And we've seen other places where they have really cut substantially down on child poverty. It's just not good economics to saddle the poverty of one generation onto the next.
Thank you. All right, we have another question in the chat we'll go to, but just a reminder that if you are watching, you can ask your questions here live. We're taking as many as we can. This question comes from Elizabeth. Elizabeth says, DOT has bike counters around the state and is installing more every year. Bellingham is going from 2 to 10 or so. Can we use data from those counters in awarding grant funds? And are there any other strategies the legislature can use to shift from inputs-based decision-making around mobility to outcomes-based? Now, Representative Shoemake, I have a slight suspicion that perhaps you might want to answer this question.
Yeah, I think I have a suspicion on who Elizabeth is too. That is a great idea. I think that we need to think deeply about how we spend our transportation dollars as well. So there are some constraints that the public doesn't always realize, that gas revenue has to be spent on this 18th Amendment protected revenues, which is Olympia talk for how we can spend the money. But we also need to be thinking about mobility more broadly, right? So if I get on a bike to go to downtown, that's one fewer car, that's one more parking space that's available for everyone else. So everyone wins when I get on a bike and I get to actually ride a bike and have fun, which I can beat my husband going downtown if I ride my bike and he drives the car. One thing that I'd really like to see with bikes, and that I've been championing even more and more, is I think that if you live within a mile of your school, your kid deserves a safe way to ride their bike or walk to school. There's really just not an excuse for it. And if we can build those safe routes to school, if we can better fund those, so for every $1 that gets granted, $10 is requested by local communities. So there's this demand in our local communities. We just haven't prioritized the money from Olympia and from the federal government. That could start to build that network. It could also mean that, if your kid can go to school by themselves, if you don't have to drive them, then you get to not wake up the baby. You get to have an extra cup of coffee in the morning, a little bit less stressful of a morning. While that kid gets out, they get exercise, they get a sense of independence. I've heard from a lot of folks that they talk about their childhood and being able to safely bike ride as maybe a way to also avoid some disruptive things that are going on at home too, right? That's like a saving grace for them. And then the mental health benefits as well. So I am all on board. I can't wait to do this work. And we even have a little bill going through the legislature that provides a tax incentive for electric bicycles, similar to the ones for electric vehicles. And I'm really excited about that.
Great, thank you. Well, we have another question that was, we have a couple that have still been emailed in. So I'm going to switch over to a question from Robert. Robert says, I'm a foster parent and I don't think kids always get a fair shake with our child welfare system. I've seen it firsthand. What can we do to make it better for kids? Representative Rule, would you like to take that question?
I would love to take that question. Great question, actually. I have been working as a vice chair on the Children, Youth, and Families Committee, and we've been doing great big strides of work in that committee on child welfare, trying to make it better for kids. One of the things that comes to mind for me that we passed through the House is a bill that addressed making sure that children have access to minors' attorneys. In my work in child welfare, in my prior job, I remember sitting in those courtrooms, and what you often see is you see representation for the agency and you see representation for the parents. But those interests sometimes do not align, and they a lot of times don't align with the best interests of the child. So that will be a really significant change, and I think we did that really right for kids this time.
Great, thank you. We have another question, and this one is from Dr. Joseph. He says, they say, what can be done to help Northwest Indian College receive the same support as the University of Washington and other Washington state colleges? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it. I think I know who Dr. Joseph is. I think he's Dr. Joe Garcia. Sorry to out you. I think this is a great idea and something we should be working together on. We've had some meetings about this. I think it's really exciting. Northwest Indian College is included in the Washington College Promise, so that's tuition support for low-income students. But we know a big part of the cost of any higher ed institution isn't just covered by tuition, it's also the buildings, it's the administration. There's a lot of reasons to subsidize higher education, and we shouldn't be treating Northwest Indian College any differently than a lot of the other similar institutions.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to another question that was submitted via email. And this one is, this is something that a lot of people in our region have been asking for a while now. The price of housing is ridiculous right now. My wife and I work full time, and we can't find a house for under $400,000. What can be done about that? And that's from Gary.
Do you want me to take that one, Alicia?
Sure.
Yeah, Gary. So that's a great question. And I would say, I always bring out the statistics. So for every 10 new homes that have 10 new households that have formed, we built 7 new homes. And that's probably gotten worse over the pandemic as people are trying to move out away from big cities into more areas like Bellingham. And so when that happens, when you have 7 people or 10 people trying to bid up something that we have 7 of, you don't need to be an economist to see that the price is going to shoot up. And so that has to be a function of us building homes. And so sometimes that's single family homes, but it's also thinking deeply about what our land use restrictions are doing in places like Bellingham. So I live in the lettered streets. I use my neighborhood to talk about land use a lot to people because it's a neighborhood that people will drive to Bellingham to walk around because it's so cute, right? And it's lovely. But when it was built, it wasn't single family zoned. It was, well, zoning didn't even exist yet, right? Zoning actually happened in 1912 in New York City to regulate the height of skyscrapers. And if you look at the homes around me, there's all sorts of, there's an apartment building across the street, 16 units. There's another apartment building right behind me. There's all sorts of duplexes and triplexes. And one of the reasons my neighborhood is interesting is it's walkable, is because there's a lot of people that can go to all these different, I can walk to 11 breweries from my house right now. And because it's a place of community where we have diversity of who can actually live here. And so it doesn't have to mean that, you're not going to become the up house, right? Where you're that little teeny tiny little single family house and big, huge skyscrapers. But there's some reasonable things that we can do, you're not going to allow for greater diversity of housing types, which means that we'll be able to build more, and we'll be able to build more in a way that doesn't necessarily increase congestion, doesn't make it harder to achieve our salmon goals, and doesn't mean that we're losing farmland as well. And so I think that's really important to think deeply about how and where we're building, and also about what are going to be the real costs, not just the cost of the rent or the mortgage, but also your transportation costs and your time costs. We've been doing some great work on that. We have a number of bills that incentivize cities to allow for more density and kind of get out of the way of building homes when the regulations are just too clunky and not really doing what their intended purpose is.
Can I jump in a little bit? I just want to say how much I appreciate that answer, and would love to add on to say that some of us want to live in the rural areas and we don't want to live in those more urban core centers. But when we build those kind of diverse housing options in the city core, it also helps some of the outlying areas to be more affordable too. So I can appreciate both, and I'm so glad that we have the two of us here to bring the diversity of perspectives, and this is a perfect example of that.
Thank you. Well, we have a couple more questions that have come in live, but there was one here in the inbox that I wanted to get to. This is from Jackie, who asks, what is the legislature doing to help small businesses right now? And I know that we've had some bills that have gone through. We've also had some budgets. So maybe Representative Rule, you can start off on that one.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about this. This gets me really excited because small businesses really are just our family, friends, and neighbors. They are not different than you or me. In fact, they often are you and me. So I have been working very hard to be the voice for small business in the legislature. One of the things I've been working on is expanding our Main Street program. The existing Main Street program is pretty exciting anyway because it involves all these multiple components for revitalizing downtowns. And I'm mostly talking about smaller downtowns like some of ours in our district, like maybe Ferndale or Blaine. And we love those walkable downtowns where we can kind of stroll on the street and do a little bit of shopping and have some dinner. That is something that is really popular right now. And it's, I think, one of the best ways that we can recover from this pandemic, particularly in the areas that are outside of the Seattle core. So I'm so excited to work on expanding that program, especially to our smaller towns, specifically under 20,000 or so folks. That's a bill that I've been working on particularly, but there's also a lot of other things that we've been working on for the Community and Economic Development Committee that I've been working on. So there is the infrastructure support with broadband, which is going to be particularly helpful for small businesses. We know this is true because so many of us are working from home right now. It's essential that we have accessible broadband. But also some of the recovery grants and loan programs that have come out as part of this package, we're still working on the details. The budget has just been proposed and we're still nuancing a lot of that. But not every small business has the same needs. Not every business has the same needs. And we're looking to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind so that everybody has the opportunity to be successful moving forward. Our small businesses, the families and friends that own these businesses have been hit so hard during this time, and they just keep getting creative and swerving and pivoting, and then we throw something else at them and they figure it out. And I've been just so impressed in our communities coming together to support them how they can, whether it be by takeout or ordering cocktails to go or any of the things that we can just creatively think of to support those beloved businesses. But I guess, you know, just really proud of the work that we're doing and also grateful to those small businesses for hanging in there through an incredibly hard time.
Great. So we have a couple more questions that have come in on the chat. And this one is from Tata. Tata asks, how can we as a society disrupt violence against trans women of color? What can policymakers do to uplift trans women of color? And I know that this is a conversation that's happening in the legislature. So whichever one of you wants to take that first.
We passed the bill, the getting rid of the gay panic defense before Alicia was here. I think that was last year. And I think we have to pass more bills saying that trans women of color deserve the rights that everyone else does. So we passed another bill this year, taking away certain healthcare discrimination things that we saw were happening. I think part of this is also just generally holding people who inflict violence on others accountable, right? So one of the bills that we were up late doing was saying that you can't come into, we've had this problem with the Bellingham Pride Parade where people will come and they'll open carry to intimidate other people in that pride parade. And we finally passed a bill to say that you can't do that. You can't openly intimidate people and make them feel like they're not welcome in their own parade. And so I think that we're going to be continuing to do this work. But Tata, if you see specific places where you think legislation is needed, I want you to know that Alicia and I are here for you. I am not a trans woman of color, so I don't always know what you're facing. But part of my job is to listen and to be that interface with the legislature and the constituents who we all want to make sure that we're supporting everyone and showing everyone that dignity.
I would just jump in to add more of the same, which is I am proud of the work we've done, but we have more work to do. And I think the very best thing we can do is center the voices of those who are most directly impacted. So our emails, you know, I've been getting like 800 emails in a day. I read every single one of them. So send over an email or give us a call. We would be happy to think through some of the things that we might do next.
Great, thank you. We have another live question here, but if you're watching now, and I know that some folks are having trouble loading the stream, and hopefully folks can get in, but we do have a couple more. This one is from Adrian. Adrian wants to ask a question about clean energy. How can we make renewable energy easier and cheaper to produce? And commercial solar installations are pretty cost prohibitive because of a lack of state incentives. Representative Shoemake, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, so every year we have this bill that keeps dying, and I'm so sad it's dying, about community solar. So the idea would be that maybe you don't own your home, right? You almost have to own your home to be able to put solar panels on top of it. But maybe you could buy into a solar share farm somewhere else, and you'd get the benefits from that. I think that's a really innovative idea. I had a bill this session that just passed the Senate today that prevents solar panels from getting too expensive. So we have a recycling program, which is great. We want to make sure that our environmental products are truly environmental, and that includes end of life. But the solar installers they didn't have it quite ready yet, and it was going to be really expensive the way to implement it now. So we delayed the opening of that so we can make sure that we don't jeopardize that. As for renewable energy more generally, one of the things that we saw is that sometimes it can be hard to cite some of these big energy projects. It's not to say that our SEPA processes, our environmental processes aren't working. They're there for a reason, and we need them to make sure that we have clean air and water and mitigate risk. But maybe there's ways that we can kind of streamline them and make sure that if you need to build a big energy project to replace our transportation fuels, that there's less uncertainty in terms of whether or not you'll actually be able to get those permits and build it. And so this summer I've committed to looking at some of the shipping impacts of when we build a big facility, whether it be energy or some other green product. Are there ways that we can mitigate those shipping impacts? Because that seems to be one of the problems right now. But again, it's one of those things where we built an economy based on one assumption of how the world works. And then we find out that CO2 emissions are causing a threat to that economy, to a threat to the way of our life. And so we have to figure out how to rebuild that.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder for folks that if you are watching live, the event, you can ask questions in the chat. We'll gladly take them. Just looking at some of the other questions that have been sent in. We have a question here that asks, what is the plan for increasing the speed for getting vaccines out? Particularly, I think they're interested in what's going to happen with some of the opening up of the phases and getting more folks eligible to be vaccinated. Representative Ruhl, I see you nodding your head. Yeah. I don't know if you want to start with that.
I would love to start because I literally my first day of office, I was like, okay, it's my first day. What am I going to do? The only thing I could think is the most important thing is getting these vaccines out. Here we are dealing with layers and layers of problems and challenges due to COVID. So the very best thing we could do for all of them, including our kids, including our economy, is get people the shots they need and want. I am continually working directly with the governor's office and the Department of Health to try to advocate for more shots. And we're just going to continue to do that because we know that that's the path out of this. With that said, I am really proud of our Whatcom County partners because they came together and they made a plan and they were so prepared that when the vaccines arrived, whether they had 24 hours notice or longer period of time, which is usually not the case, they have a plan in place and they're ready to roll. And that made me really feel proud of our community because it means that there were no wasted shots or any sort of chaos around this. This is a well-prepared plan. And as soon as we can get a hold of those shots, we are ready to go with it.
And in 2 days, it expands the eligibility to people 50 and older who have I won't read it all, but it expands it in terms of ages and in terms of people who work in restaurants, food service, manufacturing, and construction, as well as those experiencing homelessness. So that's March 31st. And then on May 1st, it's anyone over 16.
We just need more shots.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the workers, the restaurant workers and whatnot as eligible, because we have a question here about frontline workers. This comes from Richard. He asks, are you supporting Senate Bill 5115, which would officially define the current pandemic as a workplace hazard for frontline workers so that they can get L&I protections if they get ill because of a workplace infection? And Senate Bill 5115 is from Senator Kaiser and passed with 48 yays in the Senate.
So yay. I haven't looked at it in great depth, but that definitely sounds like something in general that I would support and would be happy to do because it makes sense to me, right? Like these folks have been out on the front lines and taking it for the team. So whatever we can do to support them, I think we need to do.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Alicia on that. And I'd add that one of the things that I thought was really hard when I heard from healthcare workers and kind of the beginning to middle of this pandemic was they'd get sick and they'd be told by their employer that you must have gotten that out in the community. You couldn't have gotten it here in the ER where you see lots of COVID patients. And that was a punch in the gut to them. And so I think this presumptive coverage, that's what it's called, where if you get, if you're a firefighter and you get a certain type of cancer, it's presumed you got it on the job. You don't have to prove that you got it on the job. I think presumptive coverage for certain classes of workers that are particularly exposed makes a lot of sense here right now. The stories I've heard of people just never leaving their house and never letting their families leave their house in the middle of this when they're dealing with such a stressful job because they were worried that then if they did get sick because of their job, probably it would be called community transmission and they wouldn't get any benefits. And I think we can all agree that that's wrong and they deserve better than that.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. So there have been, let's see here, a couple of more questions coming in. And right now, I'm kind of looking through here. We have some folks who are essentially concerned about Medicaid payments and medications and nursing home costs. So this question is from June. June says that I have not been able to see my children or grandchildren since the pandemic started. Medicaid payments are not enough for me to pay for my medications and nursing home costs. Is there anything that the legislature is working on that is going to help me? And it sounds like particularly what she's looking for is Medicaid rates, reimbursement rates, and things that might be in the budget that might be of a help for her.
I'll jump in unless, are you looking it up? No.
I am looking it up, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Sharon will look up the details of this. I will say this, it has been the worst for folks in nursing homes. We absolutely know how hard it is for people to be isolated, and they really have taken the brunt of it. So I think we do need to work to get those Medicaid reimbursement rates up. That is something that has been on my mind, but the budget just came out on Friday, and so I have to double check to see what it actually looks like to know. But I'm in full support of ensuring that our nursing homes have better support than they do now. I think the question asked a couple of different things. The other thing I would say is just to ensure that everybody who wants a vaccine gets a vaccine. And one of the most beautiful things I've been seeing recently is pictures of families reuniting because they were able to get the vaccine. And I realize not everybody wants one. That's fine. It's their choice. But for folks who do want one, seeing some of the emotion that comes out when people are able to hug their grandparents for the first time or hold their grandkids on their laps has been overwhelming to me. So I hope that for this person who's called in soon.
So it does increase the primary Medicaid primary care rates, so 94 million in that. That's a big expansion there. And then there are some other expansions in healthcare as well, because we knew this was a problem before the pandemic. We were hearing from nursing homes that were closing because the reimbursement rates were so low. And they didn't want to be closing, right? Like they wanted to be serving their patients. And so it was something that we knew we needed to do. And we hadn't had that commitment yet to do it. So I do think that's something that we'll be seeing moving forward. As we see people aging, we want to make sure that they're able to age with dignity and not with stress.
Great, thank you. We have another question from the chat, and this is from Sarah Beth. Sarah Beth asks, with all the recent breaches online, from unemployment to other identity theft issues, etc., what is your take on the Washington State Senate unanimous passing of legislation that will create an Office of Cybersecurity in our state? What can we expect this to change or improve? And I know that that's a bill that came from the Senate, so we might not be as familiar with it. But Representative Rule, did you want to start or?
Sure. I mean, I think we can see she laid it out quite well. This has been a real problem. And as we spend more of our time online and doing more, a variety of things online, it's critical. So I have not looked at the specifics of the bill, but I'm looking forward to seeing that come over because this is really, really important.
Great. Thank you. Another question that was emailed in, and this is very straightforward. It's from Brandon. And he asks, what are you doing to help people who are struggling to pay their rent? And I know that this is a question that comes up a lot, particularly with the eviction moratorium going on now for about a year. And so I know that that's a question that member offices get a lot.
I can jump in if you want.
That's you, Alicia. Yeah.
Or you can jump in if you'd like. I think the answer is we're doing a variety of things. We recognize what a huge lift this is. It is, folks, again, I'm going back to the security of housing. There are very few things that are as stressful as not knowing where you're going to land at night. And for people who lost their jobs, people who couldn't work because we mandated them to stay home, and they were not able to make enough doing unemployment and other ways to be able to make their rent, and they got behind. We, I think, have an obligation to ensure that they have a path out of that. And that's true for the renters, true for the landlord as well. So we have a variety of programs in this recovery budget that's out. We've put $1.07 billion for rental assistance to pay for some of this back rent after the governor's eviction moratorium is up. And then we're also investing $121 million in housing and homelessness assistance. So it's really, again, not one size fits all, but putting together packages of ways to meet the needs so that we can get people back on course through this pandemic, back on a path that is stable and productive and allows them to lead a good quality of life.
And that 121 million that Alicia mentioned, that's for folks that are eligible for housing assistance, but we just haven't had the money to be able to get them that housing assistance. And so we're kind of cleaning out that backlog and making sure that if you're eligible, you can actually get this help and this support that you know you need. We all know you need.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we had several questions about rent and moratorium, so that's, I think we got a couple there. So we have a question here, and this is one at which you know, maybe there's not an answer in the legislature right now, but you may want to know about. And this is from someone who didn't leave their name. It said, "Can the state do anything to stop robocalls? I am now getting them as early as 6:30 in the morning," which I think is sort of something happening across the country right now.
I think that's FEC, isn't it? Or FCC?
I don't know. It's a good question, and I'd be happy to find out.
Yeah.
I could do some digging and figure it out.
I know Congress was looking at something on robocalls, and it always falls apart because people make a lot of money on robocalls, and they go and they lobby Congress.
Yep. Well, we will be putting up the members' contact information after the event ends, so you'll have a couple of minutes there where you could jot down some phone numbers or email addresses, and if you have information you want to share, you can send off an email, and I'm sure folks can track down some resources. I think we have time for a couple more questions, or at least one more question. So, but if you have one and you're in the chat watching right now, please make sure to go ahead and submit that question. We'll get to it if we can, and if not, we will try to respond to it after the event in the chat. Now, this is a question about healthcare workers and the healthcare worker shortage. Question is, with the pandemic, we've seen that we need more healthcare workers, from respiratory care therapists and just regular general practitioners. Is there anything that is being done right now to find and train more healthcare workers for the state?
Go ahead.
You know, I haven't worked specifically in those areas, but I have been working on a task force for behavioral health workforce development, because in a similar vein, we realize that we have this great need for mental health care, but we don't have providers to do it. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in that. We've passed multiple pieces of legislation through the House already, and we'll continue to do that work. I would say, in addition to all of that, you know, we removed a B&O tax for providers. We took down some barriers for education. I mean, I think that's going to be ongoing work. But the other thing I would say is that we put together a childcare package so that women can go back to work. Our workforce in a lot of these caregiving roles has been decimated because we don't have the volume that we had of really great workers doing these specialty jobs, but they're home taking good care of their kids, which is really great for a while, but we really need them to bring their specialty back to work.
And I would say that this was happening before the pandemic as well, is that this isn't new, that we had a shortage of healthcare workers. And one of the things that we did in the 2019 session in the Washington College Promise was we put particular emphasis on people who are maybe going to community college to get a nursing degree, or my cousin got an LPN at nursing at a community college long ago. I ran a bill, I think it was one of my first bills, that would allow these people, if they were student parents, if they were in that profession, early learning, or a couple of other really high need professions, to be able to access subsidized childcare without a work requirement. And that is now being expanded as part of this Fair Start for Kids Act to all student parents.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. We have, we've had this question come up a couple of times, and so I'll ask the last one that was asked, and this is from Melinda. Melinda says, "Thank you for this town hall. Washington State has made tremendous strides over the last several years in reducing gun violence. What are you doing to ensure that that is protected? I think in regards to just protecting or gun legislation, reducing gun violence legislation."
I'll take that one. The big one that we did yesterday, was it yesterday? It feels like a million years ago. The days are long and short at the same time. The big one we did yesterday was restrictions on where you can open carry. And this may not be something that has huge gun violence implications, but it is something that is about intimidation. So we saw, I mentioned what happened at Bellingham Pride, where people go, they open carry purposely to intimidate the other members of that group. We also saw it in the US Capitol. So there have been times where right-wing militia groups don't like what we're doing, and they decide to come in with a lot of guns. And I remember one time leaving my office, the Capitol was under lockdown, and I was planning on going home because it was Friday at 4 o'clock. And I was wondering if I would be able to get to my car safely. And that is not part of, free speech ends when you're intimidating other people, when you don't feel that you can actually use that free speech. And so you can still get a concealed permit license and you can still conceal carry, but you can't carry guns in the US Capitol. We already had it at sporting events and convention centers. That was already part of the law. And then we expanded it to the Washington State Capitol, sorry, and permitted demonstrations. So you can't go and intimidate people the way we saw this summer at permitted demonstrations. And so that's the big gun violence bill that we're doing this year. I think that also some of these mental health interventions are also a big part of it as well. That especially when you look at where gun violence is, it's on suicides. And so let's make sure that we're able to get people the access they need. We forgot to mention it, but there's the 988 number. That was actually one of the really big mental health pushes that we made, was soon there will be a number up and running where, just like you might call 911, if you're having a physical health crisis, you'll be able to call 988 if you're having a mental health care crisis, and you'll be able to actually access someone. And we've heard from people that they're going through a mental health crisis. They may not necessarily know how to access help. That's not always an easy thing to do.
And I'd love to jump in and just say, not to be confused with all gun violence being related to mental health. And many people have mental health needs that have nothing to do with being at risk for gun violence. But I do think that it's really important when we think about, like you said, suicidality, and that 988 is one of the many things that we're working to pass this session. But I think we're looking at quite a bit of legislation around increasing access and budget, increasing access to a variety of services for substance use disorder and mental health issues of the really significant level. Particularly, there's a forensics hospital at the UW that's fairly large, and there's just really a number of different things on the full spectrum of care for mental health. So somewhat related to your question, but also just wanted to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about that as well.
Well, we are just about out of time, so that will be our last question. So first off, thank you for everyone who participated in tonight's virtual town hall. I'm going to turn it over to the legislators just for some quick closing remarks. Representative Shewmake, would you like to go first, and then we'll hear from Representative Rule?
Sure, sounds good. I just wanted to thank you all for spending a sunny day, and maybe you're watching this outside, I don't know, watching us talk about legislation in Olympia. One of the things that has been really important to me, in addition to all the good policy, is also trying to reach out and kind of demystify this system. Things just seem to happen in Olympia. You read about it in the news, and legislators just do things. And you don't always know, well, how can I get involved? How can I influence that? What does it mean when something's passing appropriations? Or what does it mean when something's stuck in committee? And I want you to always feel that you can ask those questions, that you can always tell me your values. And I have passed bills that were the ideas of constituents, right? That were other people's ideas that they said, hey, Sharon, I have a problem. Will you help me work on this? And so sometimes you have a problem and I'll say, well, maybe Alicia can help you because I don't know how to solve that. But sometimes we actually can work together and do really great work and change rules in ways that make a lot more sense for people. So government is big and slow, of course. I joke that it makes academia look positively efficient. It's a very human process, but that also means that you're a part of it, even if you may never have thought of yourself as a part of government before. I really appreciate people reaching out and telling me what they think.
Thank you. And mostly, I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight and for bringing your questions and concerns. It drives everything that we do here. There is not a day or night that goes by that I am not thinking about you in our community, thinking about what are all the variety of needs. I know things are heavy right now. I know that we have economic reports across the state that look brilliant. And I also know that we have a lot of people who are struggling to put food on the table in our own community. And I see you children and youth. I see what you've missed and the grief that we're all dealing with on some level or another. And I see that the need is high for our young people. And I hear your concerns on all of the variety of things that has come up tonight, but also that you've brought to me in our office as we're doing this work day to day. And I appreciate your ongoing communication so that I can just know exactly what it is that you need me to do to be here for you and elevate your voice, your concerns, and look for practical solutions and look for the very best ways to meet these challenges in these times that we've never seen before. I'm proud of the work that we're doing. We have unprecedented amount of investment in things that matter to us. And I do believe that we're going to see some really neat outcomes at the end of this. Nobody would wish a pandemic upon anyone, but at least we are going to do the very best that we can to bring you solutions and bring back investments into the 42nd district that will be positive. We are working very hard to create good paying jobs. That's still happening. We're going to see a ton of construction happening. I think there is something for everybody in the proposed budget. Wherever you live, whether it's sidewalks in Sumas or body cams in law enforcement or creating jobs and housing and a way station in Bellingham. We're working on the housing issue, the homelessness issue, and we're doing a ton of investment in mental health. You're going to see trauma-informed therapists in your kids' schools. You're going to see an increase in outdoor education. I mean, we are working very hard to make sure that we meet you right where you're at. So I thank you for all of your emails, for your calls, and for engaging. I know there's many things to attend to, and taking the time to be a voice for you and those in your families, in your communities is really appreciated. It's literally driving everything that I do here, so keep it up. And thank you for your time tonight.
Great, thank you. That's all the time we have this evening. Thank you for attending tonight's event. If we did not get to your question, or if you think of one now that we're wrapping up, we are going to be posting the members' contact information after this event. So just keep watching and you'll see that information, and you can reach out via phone or email. Thank you very much and have a great week.